Welcome back. Today we are talking with Margaret Millett. Margaret, we had a great chat about DEI a few minutes ago. Now, this one, we're going to change gears a little bit. And I'd like to talk to you about addressing executive expectations. Not necessarily buy-in, let's say, because we could already have the buy-in, but then sometimes we really mess it up because we're not following through on how we report, what we should report on, addressing, expectations. So could you give us some insights, what kind of things are executives looking for that really make them, their eyebrows rise and just say, oh, wow, yeah.
Oh, Alex, sometimes I wish I was a mind reader because sometimes knowing what executives want is always a challenge. But I think what I'll start off with is, really taking a step back and saying, that executive reporting is an analytical tool that's going to provide your organization executives with essential data that they're going to need to know about how to make good strategic and tactical decisions from a holistic view based on your business continuity data. And they have to keep in mind that with data, the more data you have and the more mature your data is, they're able to make better informed decisions that could hopefully help your program and help manage and mitigate the risks that are taking place in your organization. I think the other thing that people need to just stop and think about is what I'm going to call the executive dashboards, because I do think they are essential tools for executive reporting. Again, the data can come from various sources. They should be trying to be real time, and they should be looking at the organizational key performance indicators, or better known as KPIs, that summarize what is it that you think that they need to know so they can see data quickly, and then they're able to helpfully answer some of those big questions based on the data that you're presenting to them.
So what kind of data should we present to them? And what kind of data should we not present to them?
I think that's also a revolving door, Alex. So, for example, what is it that you think that they want to know? Because again, if you were to ask an executive who's not familiar with business continuity, they probably wouldn't know what to ask for you to go report. So think of it that way. I think the other thing is I'm always about seeing what others do. So find out maybe from their chief of staff what is a dashboard that they like, and see if you should leverage that format for your organization. But for now, I would say start looking at, hey, here are the top threats based on your risk assessment that you've been doing, geographically, because again, that's going to be any report that we see coming out about concerns for the sea level, climate change is out there, political concerns are. So no matter where you are, somehow this is probably going to touch you either today or tomorrow or in the future. So I would say start preparing that information, and taking a look at that and presenting that to them. Looking at the top functions that you perform, because again, everybody wants to make sure that whatever the bread and butter is for your organization is going to continue to come through the door. And then also looking at what are the recovery time objectives for those, because they need to know if something happens that process A needs to be up in 4 hours, B 8 hours, C 24, and et cetera. And also, I think that people still want to know who's putting those plans together for these areas. I think that really came to light in COVID, that they wanted to know, like, hey, Alex was the owner of that plan, Margaret put it together, and Mickey Mouse was the one that documented some of the expert information because he does the job every day. I think it's important that they know that, because they don't know necessarily Margaret Millett and Mickey Mouse, but they're going to know Alex Fullick because you're higher up on the food chain. So like, oh, that's Alex's division. Great. I know that, because they might not know process A, B, and C, but they know the name. Therefore, they can feel confident that they've got a rock solid plan. And I think exercises, one thing that I can always say in my career that the executives always ask me about is like, have we exercised the plan? And I've said this before, I look at a business continuity management program as a set of stairs. You can't exercise till you get to the top of the staircase, but yet that's the thing that they really focus in on, because that's the one thing that they do know about business continuity management is exercise, exercise, exercise. So make sure you're telling them about your exercise program and the various types of exercises that you've done, because one exercise is not the same. You might be doing an emergency notification exercise. You might be doing a plan walkthrough. You might be doing a tabletop. You might be doing a simulation. So let them know. And also, occasionally put out that invitation to invite them. They may say yes. So, that's a good thing for your program.
I was just thinking that, with these exercises, sometimes the focus gets so much on, did we exercise this plan? Did we get these people doing it? And then the decision makers are never involved. And there's always this disconnect
Yeah.
when something actually does happen. And again, to what I said in the previous segment, things fall apart in the program.
Right. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned, linking to KPIs. What about linking to the enterprise risk management? Because sometimes we do a risk assessment in our programs, resilience or business continuity or disaster recovery, and we have one set of risks. But on an executive level, they're looking at a different set of lists.
Yeah.
List of risks.
Say that 10 times fast.
That's a mouthful, yeah. So there's often a disconnect between those two. So executives may look at what we're providing. We have these risks of, I'll make it simple, fires and floods and things like that.
Yeah.
However, they're looking at a risk of geopolitical risk, and we quite often, I think, don't link to that. Because they can have an understanding of how we're contributing to that. What are your thoughts there?
I try when I go to new organizations to go get as much data about the risk framework. Sometimes they exist, sometimes they don't. But I do think it's important to say, like, we have collaborated, because sometimes even though we're looking at the fires and floods and the enterprise risk management teams looking at the geopolitical, et cetera, I do think it's important to even ask the local business people, what are your thoughts on it? Because again, the enterprise risk management team might be looking at it based on a large set of data that's readily available to everybody now in this day and age. But I always remember I did a lot of work in South Korea at one point, and everyone was always worried about North Korea. And the people I worked with were like, we've lived with this our whole life. We're fine. Like, North Korea could be doing whatever they're going to do, but we're still going to get up and go to work today. And, if we get bombed today, well, we get bombed today. Like they just were immune to it. So I think some of it is understanding, what's their concern locally and how they're ready to mitigate those circumstances. And then also just saying that, we did look at the larger picture. This is what we were able to gather locally and get things done. And I think the other thing that's really important, Alex, is working with your enterprise risk management to understand, what are those concerns that are taking place. We've got a very topsy-turvy world right now with political elections. Like Guatemala is holding elections on Sunday. Don't know what's going to happen there. And new leaders come in. What's that going to do? What new rules are happening that are going to impact things? And then what world events? You've got Women's World Cup taking place right now, or has finished. I haven't followed it all, but you've got the Olympics next year. So how do these things that are like big known world events going to impact you? What special things do you need to be reporting on that? But I do think it's important to say that you have collaborated in this day and age with your risk or your audit team or whomever else is looking at risk, to make sure that you can say, hey, we're all trying to sing from that same sheet of music to help serve the business.
And I think that's a good message, because quite often when we, in resilience or business continuity, put our reports or status reports together, we have so much detail.
Yeah.
And you kind of alluded to that sometimes that's too much information for executives.
Yeah.
And we have to package it in a way that's understandable to them.
Yeah. And that ties into making sure that you have what I'm going to say good executive reporting, because again, you have to make sure that the report, one, isn't size font 6 when you give it to them, because you're trying to get so much on that 1 or 2 page. But, what are the characteristics of successful executive reporting when you're at your organization? And to me, it's also taking a look at the strategy that the company's talked about, because I'm going to use just a term, like every organization probably has a theme that somehow relates to have a delightful customer experience or something along those lines. So make sure that when you are talking about the work that you're doing, that, even though it's business continuity planning, that you're trying to say, like, even for our internal stakeholders, we're trying to ensure that we're looking at those strategies long-term to ensure that the day-to-day operations for the company are going to continue to be successful. And then also try and tie them into whatever the key performance indicators are for the company. This way you can say, I tie to this one or I tie to that one. Because again, you want to make sure that, again, if the budgets are a little tight, you want to be like, hey, we need that business continuity team, because they tie into our key corporate performance indicators.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's the view that executives want to see, and I think that helps us show value, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, which is another big topic that everyone in our industry talks about. You know, how do we show value?
Right.
If we're not linking to what executives expect, the KPIs, the risk profile that the organization has, then we're always going to struggle to show
Yeah.
value.
Right. And again, I think it's starting to understand what your audience is. I mean, some of this is where I'm going to say you might have to start off small, and think about what's important to them. Think about what their goals are for what they're going to want out of a report, understand their needs and concerns. And then also just make sure that whoever's presenting that information, because it might not be you, it could be maybe, somebody that's 2 levels up from you, that they feel comfortable talking about that data, because
Hmm.
you can only put so much in the notes or in an appendix. So you still have to make sure that somebody is able to understand it, read it, and deliver it.
Yeah, that's true. That's another risk I was thinking of from our side is we will have these reports and we may be addressing KPIs, but it's rarely us who's ever the one presenting it.
Yeah.
And the reports, whether it be the metrics or the dashboard, ends up being, for lack of a better way of saying it, watered down. And then our message kind of gets lost. But sometimes it's being watered down because people don't understand it.
Well, and I think sometimes, Alex, for the real estate sake of an executive briefing or board briefing, sometimes we get pushed to the appendix. Then we really don't get a voice. And therefore, it's very important to make sure that the picture or the words that you select are impactful, because that is then where the picture has to be worth 1,000 words to the reader, because it could get interpreted incorrectly.
Yeah. You mentioned start small. Can you expand on that a little bit? Like, what do you mean that you start small? Let's say I'm just the BCM or resilience analyst. What does start small mean for me to get up, to a
Yeah.
higher level, to
I
executive?
love that question, because again, I talked about it's a journey to build a program.
Mm.
So figure out what's the very first thing that you can report on. It might not be as dynamic as you want it to be, but so say you start off because you're starting your program. So literally just put together a chart that's going to say, hey, risk assessments, BIAs, plans, and exercises. You could do it across your regions or your states, depending on where you're at. But just then make it a table. That's the baby step, to say, hey, I'm working with, I don't know, 8 areas. This is what I was able to accomplish this year. Then maybe next year say, hey, I added on more so that you can show year over year increase in the work that you're doing. So expand it to be something bigger. Maybe then you've evolved it a little bit more so that you could do a decent maybe pie chart in Excel, because again, you don't want to put something together that looks like a lot of blanks here.
Yeah.
um, and then figure out, as you continue on your journey and you maybe get into a BCM tool, or again, you're able to do things in your corporate reporting products, whatever they may be, figure out how to make it bigger and better. But change the look and feel also for your audience, because one thing that I try and say is, like, don't use the same budget. Like, I know the budget template is going to be the same hypothetically, but like the deck that you're going to say as to why I need the funding, don't use the same slides from last year, because they'll be like, you really didn't put a lot of thought into this. So change it up. Give me a few other slides to tell me why you need X amount of dollars to go fund your program. But figure out, as you continue to evolve to get to the right level as playing in the sandbox with all the other big kids, what's my view going to look like? Because you don't have a lot of data when you first start a program, and you got to figure out still how to have a meaningful impact to say, I know that we're maybe a small team and we're evolving and growing, but look at what we did this year, and look at what we did the second year, and maybe the third year is when you're going to get your beautiful reports that you can really say, wow, look at all the work that they're doing, or wow, look at how many risk assessments, BIAs, like. And that's what I'm saying, show the year over year, because I think that's a powerful, when you start off saying, hey, I did 6, now we've done 12, we've done 23, etc.
What about some of the things we continue to report on that maybe we shouldn't? The things that kind of turn off executives, like, oh, here we go, Alex and his doom and gloom again, because I've run into that where
I hear
executives
what
have
you're
actually felt
saying.
that.
It's like, oh yeah, yeah, yeah. We had another, like, the poor people of Hawaii. Like, oh, there's another forest fire that we've had to deal with. It might have impacted our business. I as much as it's doom and gloom, I think that you got to turn that negative into a positive, saying, like, hey, because we had business continuity plans in this area, we were able to get the business back up and running relatively quickly. We were able to resume operations. We did not skip a beat on our service level agreements. And basically, the public didn't know that we had a disruption to our office. I think that's where you've got to take that negative and turn it into a positive. And then also get that feedback from them of like, as I said, it's like you're dating. It's like, basically, I'm going to say this, like, you didn't put the tube of the cap on the toothpaste, Alex. I don't know if that's a pet peeve of yours if you don't tell me. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah.
it's like some of it, it's like you really wish the executives would say, I want to see A, B, and C. And I know in the beginning they can't tell you that, but after they start and see what data you have, then say, you know what, that's great. Can you put this information? I get it. I don't need to see how you explain it to me in detail anymore. That you can put in the appendix. But I really want to know more about what are the risks and the risk assessment and how you've tied that into your exercising so that I know in the future we have taken the areas of our organization that really had fires and floods as a top concern and we run them through a BC exercise. So I know that if they get hit, they're going to be more prepared. Tell me that. I'm not a mind reader.
Yeah. So meeting expectations then is really a two-way street. It's not just me trying to funnel information up. I have to get the proper feedback to come down as well.
Yeah. And another thing that I always think of, Alex, is, for business continuity teams, COVID was hell in many ways, and we can all say that. But I think I think about it for some of the lines of business that we as consumers experience. Like, I'm just going to say this, retail, they had to pivot very quickly if you were in retail because you weren't doing, hey, I'm going to the store anymore. It was, how do I, increase my website? How do I do the curbside pickup? How do what's that new story that you had to go quickly develop a report to go tell? Because, when COVID first hit, all stores were closed. You were either doing curbside pickup or you were doing online ordering. So how do you then change your story from brick and mortar to the curbside to the online? Same thing with dining, all of that. And that's now still here to stay. I mean, still here in the United States, you can still order, you can go order a pair of sneakers from Dick's Sporting Good and, go pick them up curbside. I can go order a meal and go pick it up curbside or get it delivered. So I think that's where, how do you then look at what the newest trends is in your organization and figure out, hey, that's a new report I need to go give my executives. And not because it's a crisis, it's now going to become your norm.
Mm-hmm. True. Yeah. The grocery store not far from my house used to have 2 spots for pickup. Well, now there's a whole row, for it, and it's natural. There's always cars there waiting for their order to come out.
Yeah.
And that never used to happen before.
Right.
So something else that just triggered a thought here when you're talking about different groups and doing different things. How do you go about reporting business continuity or resilience progress, your program status, when you're really not just reporting on business continuity, you're kind of reporting on how well the rest of the organization is doing? And that's kind of got to be, I would think, kind of a delicate, situation. You don't want to point out that finance is doing terrible.
Yeah.
So how do you go about kind of massaging that in a way and reporting in an effective way so that they can say, hey, finance doesn't look good. Here's how we can go about addressing that.
And Alex, this is part of the journey because, initially you're just going to say, hey, finance has a risk assessment, BAA, and a plan, and they did an exercise. But as you mature and also the finance team understands what your cadence is of how often you're going to need to get things updated, reviewed, and approved, and that, you're giving them hypothetically, I'm just going to say 2 weeks to go do something or 3 weeks or whatever your time is that you feel is right for your stakeholders. You then got to tell them in a nice way, like, okay, we just before reported solid numbers, but now we're moving what I'm going to say to what I believe most organizations use is the red, yellow, green reporting system. And if you don't get things done, you're going to then move from, being red to green. And I think it's okay to tell people it's okay to be in one of these cycles because you're going to have new mergers and acquisitions, people come and go. They might, sunset something. So you're not always going to be green. That's part of the life cycle of a BCM program. But I think that's when we can also just say, hey, footnote, like, hey, the finance department's in a little bit of a holding pattern because Alex Fullick, the CFO, just left, and we're waiting for the interim one to come in, get them up to speed, make sure that they're feeling comfortable with it, and then we'll get back on getting things done. But it happens. It happens. And so therefore that's got to be taken into consideration. But you've got to be able to tell the story.
Yeah.
And you've got to make sure that the finance people are informed, because there's nothing else then than, that's coming around and back down to the CFO.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I was thinking, is the networking component here.
Yeah.
When you're reporting, and not making fun of anyone in finance, so nobody send me an email. But it was, you can't everybody be green, and not everyone's going to be on the same page. There will be incidents that happen that will impact one group and not another. But it's a delicate balance, because you don't want to intentionally make someone look bad, because I don't think anyone is really,
well, and I think most continuity professionals, Alex, do a 1-year horizon planning of like, this is going to be your schedule, this is when we're going to do your exercise. But let's face it, if the finance team is having a major upgrade to an application next June, and that's when I was going to do stuff, I may or may not still be slotted for June, because it may not make sense because of a new application coming on board, whatever. That's when you've got to do the give and take on what makes sense for the line of business, the new application, any regulatory issues, stuff like that. You may have to push things up, you may have to push them back. You may have to just say, go forward and we'll do this in April. And then when you get everything settled with your new app, we'll come back and visit it in the fall. You got to just figure that out.
Yeah. And then reporting that effectively up to executives, so they don't see, they may know about this upgrade that's happening. Oh, the upgrade's going fantastic. Right. But the other half is, oh my God, finance is red. What's going on? It's like,
we're going to be able to report at the end of every quarter.
Let's connect the two. This is why, it's, don't panic. This is why, what's going on.
Yeah, because that's the main thing, is don't have any surprises upstream or downstream when you do your reporting.
Yeah. I in my project management, program management days, we had that happen every so often. We learned really quick, when something big gets identified, report it right away. And then, when it makes its official, I guess you could say, debut on a report, people understand, okay, I know about that, and there isn't a freak out.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, your reporting has to be growing and be agile, just like your company, your department, and your organization. So, just because you created a great dashboard for the start of 2023 doesn't mean it's going to be the same for 2024.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of the show, Margaret. Thank you so much for sharing all this. And, I know you do a lot of reporting and you do a lot of traveling. So I really wanted to pick your brain on, meeting executive expectations, because I know you're doing that. So I really appreciate you sharing a lot of this. This is great stuff. And I hope it helps a lot of our industry professionals and our colleagues and friends as they, struggle sometimes with their reporting.
Thank you, Alex. I hope this is insightful for everyone, and I look forward to seeing you again in a live and in person, or on a future Preparing for the Unexpected.
Yeah, both. It'll be both, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Margaret. I really appreciate your time and expertise with us today. And everyone watching and listening, stay prepared, everybody. If you liked that video, thumbs up. If you didn't like that video, thumbs down. But leave me a message and let me know your thoughts. Of course, don't forget to subscribe. And in the meantime, stay prepared, everybody.